So one question was, what's the best way to make sure all players are being heard and having fun?
I make sure initially that once I know what their characters are, I've got something that
That they,
each of them need to do in a
yeah,
game. Like
yeah,
whatever it is, the druid, there's going to be something that needs to be growth, you know, nature related. There's a thief, there's going to be some crazy trap. There's always something for somebody's
skills.
master skills,
Yes, that can be
And
hard
sure,
too.
the thief can jump in and backstab, of course. Obviously, the thing is you need everybody's help,
Mm-mm.
but there are gonna, you just make sure that they've got something that they are that no one else can do.
Yep.
Especially if you have characters that are definitely a little more sit back, a little more, just kind of waiting to see what everything else is happening, and you're
Mm-hmm.
like, you kind of throw it out there. You're like,
Well, there's
and
there's different types of
and
players too. Some people enjoy watching and they don't like to participate that
sure.
much, and
I mean, as
so it's
long as
hard
they're
to
having a good
tell.
time.
Exactly, it's hard to
I
tell. Like, are they not having fun or are they having
Yeah,
fun? So you got to kind of ask them.
yeah, and I mean, and of course, hilariously, most of my players when I'm not playing professionally are all performers, so they
Well, that
are all out there, and they're
yeah.
all, I
Well,
swing from
that's
the vine, and then
yeah.
I, you know, do all these, and they're great, they're hilarious, but
Well, those are the easy people to DM though.
right,
Like when
right.
you
Well, the
DM
thing is, you gotta
a
you gotta kind of like
tone it down.
level
Yeah,
them out if there's somebody else who's not anywhere close.
exactly.
So, how do you make sure a pretty good way is make sure that each scenario, again, I'm going to refer to like if you're being hired to do a one shot for a group. So
Yeah,
you know what the characters are, or at least you should. You better know what the characters are. It always helps. And then that way you've got the scenario that they've got, and yeah, make sure that there is something that each one of them can do. And again, if you're doing a birthday party, you kind of want to also make sure that the whoever is their birthday, not
is the main.
necessarily, I'm not saying you have to let them get the killing shot of the last thing,
Mm,
but at least you should be close to that,
yeah,
tell a good story, make it their day. But you don't have to seriously fudge everything just to make that happen. If you set it up right, then you can still, it'll still work.
yeah,
That's my effort when someone is doing a birthday party or something like that, where you're like, you've got one person who is really the king of this, king or queen or of the day, and they're like, yeah, you want to give them a couple of things that they can do, but you still don't leave everyone else out either.
yes,
So that
makes
that
sense.
that's I'm trying to think. There's plenty of other tactics, of course, and of course checking in and gauging your audience. Obviously, I say audience because, of course, again, I view it as a show,
Mm,
and you can, if you're, especially if you're at the table, and then you can kind of check in on everybody, see how's everybody's doing. You get the feel of how they're doing. So whoever's not
yeah,
interacting the most, then your next NPC, maybe they only want to deal with that person because they're whatever that character is. They're
hmm,
more similar to you. All right, that character's a gnome. All right, this next NPC is actually a gnome, and they kind of want to strike up a conversation with a fellow gnome. They're like, "Oh my gosh, have you been back to Gnome Town recently?" And you start an interaction with them. It's like, ignore the fighter who's trying to muscle in on the conversation. They just put them
yeah,
out. So there's plenty of ways to get around
yeah.
that sort of
There's
thing.
yeah, I've noticed, and also there's one issue I've personally run into is like you have say an urban campaign and somebody
Mhm.
wants to be a barbarian, and it's like,
Right.
well, you might want to reconsider that. Like, there's gonna be a lot of talking, and your intelligence is like 8, and your
Well,
wisdom's like 8, and your charisma is like 8. And I mean, personally, as I'm an experienced DM, right? So I've actually played a barbarian in a urban setting, and I would just
mhm.
have them do all kinds of stupid things as like kind of
Oh
comic
yeah.
relief, and it was fine. But if somebody's not an experienced player, they probably would not want to play barbarian in an urban setting. Like I'd
Right.
have them just take people's drinks out of their hands and drink them, and like, you know, take food off food carts, start eating it, and ask for like, it was like an orc barbarian. So I'd be like, oh, can I have some elf stew? And like, like in the middle of an urban setting, and just like, things that everyone's like,
absolutely.
And so it's all like comic relief type stuff, but then it gets to the battle and he just like smashed his face because he is what he is.
Conan,
Conan's not really a barbarian though. He's like not like in the D&D sense. I mean, yeah, it could be. Well, thing is, depends on how you do it. Like if you're talking like half orc barbarian who has an intelligence of 8, like you're limiting what you can do. Now Conan, he kind of does fit the barbarian D&D, but he had like a higher charisma, higher intelligence. Like he wasn't he
was the hero.
Thoughtless burst. I mean, everything went right for him. But yeah, he was. Yeah. He was also kind of like more like a multi-class barbarian thief. To be totally honest with you.
Yeah.
He had a lot of thief stuff too. He did. And depending on what day Howard decided to write the story, because it wasn't consistent even.
Yeah, it's like he has all these skills. That's all right.
I mean, it's pulp. Yeah. That's Pulp Fiction, right? It's just that's how it is. Like you read pulp, and the hero can do anything.
Sure. Yeah. So but yeah, I'm just trying to think of any other little bits of
that's all
people involved. Read the audience, read the crowd, and just you can tell if they're having a good time, they're having a good time. You don't need to do anything else. But if they're kind of like
my only problem is usually you can tell just by looking at people, right? But sometimes there's some people that it's hard to gauge.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
And those are the people. It's the book. What is it called? Sly Flourish. I forget Lazy Dungeon Mastering. He gives like types of Sly Flourish. He gives types of players. I think it's in that book. Might be another book. I don't know. I've read a few, kind of blending together in my mind. But it talks about the types of players, and the hardest one to gauge is the one that likes to watch, because it's hard to tell. Are they enjoying themselves? Are they bored? Are they actually like to watch? Are they a player that likes to watch? Or are they just totally bored? And they don't ever come up and say, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. They just kind of go along with what everybody else is doing. Even if you do something with them, they're still kind of like, but afterwards, I say, that was the best game I ever had in my life. And you're like, what? You didn't even do anything. And they're like, but they love watching other people.
Yeah.
But I've had some people that I played with, and I couldn't tell if are they that kind of player, or are they just there because, they're there with there's friends they're with, and maybe their friends drug them along. They don't really enjoy the game. I couldn't really tell, to be totally honest with you. And I just wasn't sure. But I mean, that's where communication stuff comes in. But, just without being awkward, it's like, how do you talk to somebody and say, are your friends making you come? Or are you actually enjoying the game, right? And so there's a little problem. That's the main problem I've had personally, is like, is this person just a watcher? And they weren't there by themselves either. So it's like, is this...
Right.
Are they being drug along? Or are they watching? Now, if they showed up their own and they're like paying you, and they're like showing up every week, and they aren't really doing anything, but they're still paying you and showing up, you got to assume they're enjoying themselves.
They're doing something right, or you're doing something right. Yeah, sure.
Like, why would they keep showing up? Those are the hardest. The rest are pretty obvious. Like, they'll get involved in things. They'll do stuff, like it's pretty obvious that they're the other types of players. Like, it talks about other kinds. Like, there's a strategist. They always want to do everything exactly right. But you can tell if they're enjoying themselves or not. There's the rules lawyer, and then all you got to do is give them a job. If you give them a job, those guys have lots of fun, right? Yep. And then there's the, the role player, and they just want to role play. They don't even care about combat. So you got to
rolling a 1 is just as good as rolling a 20, because I'm going to play it, whatever it is. That's what, which of course, I mean, does lead to a lot of comedy, and that's honestly where I sit in the Dungeons and Dragons world. Is like
yeah,
it's a very real, very dangerous world, but also hilarious.
Yes. I usually sit somewhere between a strategist and a role player, because I am into this in combat. I like the strategy, but I like screwing with stuff also, like the role player thing. I rolled a 1. Well, I just did something crazy, basically. Like, make something up. Like, I literally make up, like, I play in one game now, and I play a wizard cleric multi-class, and he has like, his charisma is horrible, and so he'll like roll he always fails his charisma checks. So I always just role play out like what he does. He always does something super awkward, like he's hitting on chicks. He's a time mage, so he's like, have you heard about the temporal distortion? phenomena of lovely, like in the bar hitting on girls, right?
Just wizard explain me temporal.
Yeah.